Well, good day. My name is Gord Winkel. I'm the director of the David and Joan Lynch School of Engineering, Safety and Risk Management. I also have the privilege and the pleasure of working with your professor, Dr. Leanne Lefsrud. And together, we research and advance the science of risk management. Well, here you are as engineers, and well, what's this safety and risk management really about? Well, we're both here to tell you that engineers are in the business of risk management. That's right. Risk management is a core competency for all successful engineers. Now, as you can see, looking at the pictures behind here, things don't always go well. And so our job is to think about how we can take risk management to the next level. I think it's a very sobering statistic for you folks to understand that in our civilized, industrialized world today, we in fact incur some 4 major incidents every week. And that's a trend that as engineers, we're going to have to work to address. And so let's take a trip together. A trip that's going to go back some 40 plus years. We're going to call it an engineer's journey, and well, it's mine. And so this takes us back to 1973. Yeah, admittedly, that makes me a bit old, but that's where I did start. And so in 1973, I joined the same fine university that you're now part of. And I took this thing called mechanical engineering. And it was exciting. I know it's a very complex field, but really, when you boil it down, it's about anything that moves. And there's a lot of engineering to do in that sphere. And so it was that I took my degree. It was a great university to attend, and I decided to stay. Yeah, I stayed, and I decided to do a master's degree. And that was wonderful. You know, in a master's degree, you start to appreciate where all those equations came from when you were an undergraduate. And if you're an engineer like me, this slide should just warm your heart. Don't you love those equations? Yeah, they're very important, and they form the basis for our skills and knowledge. Well, we're going to apply those now, and we're going to go to industry. It's 1979. And I started with a major firm called Syncrude Canada Limited up in Fort McMurray, a firm that mined the oil sands to produce synthetic crude oil. And here's where I started, in the mining area. You can see in this particular picture, large drag lines, bucket wheels, and conveyor systems that are very much in the business of mining the oil sand and sending it back to the plant. Well, when you look at this equipment, while it looks impressive, and it is, that drag line weighs 6,500 metric tons, the bucket wheel 2,200 metric tons, conveyor belts some 2 meters in width, requiring up to 5,200 horsepower just to drive it a couple of kilometers. I mean, this is big and heady stuff, and it was a mechanical engineer's dream to work here. Because I will tell you that none of it worked. That's right. Every system that you see here in the novel and tough oil sands application did not, in fact, perform as expected. And so as a mechanical engineer, I got to work on improving how this equipment performed. And that was tough. It cracked, it stalled, it wore, and it sunk. But through application of engineering, science, and innovation, this equipment was brought to world-class standards, and Syncrude essentially produced its first 1 billion barrels of crude oil from this fine equipment. Well, I started into operations management about that time, and while we were very much into the technical side of how to make that equipment better, as you've just heard, we were also very much focused on production. And then, as a young leader becoming manager of mine maintenance, I was suddenly faced with the fact that I was also responsible for this thing called safety. When it came to safety, we had measures. And one measure that is very robust is what we call a lost time injury rate. Now, a lost time injury rate is something that is very definitive. It means that you've had an injury sufficiently severe that you can't go back to work for your next shift because you're rehabilitating either at home or in hospital. So these are very serious injuries. And I have to tell you that in our application, we would rigorously measure those. And at the levels that we were operating at, from 2 to 2.5, and what that really means is that if 100 people work a year, 2 or slightly greater than 2 people a year would incur one of these injuries. We thought we were doing pretty well. And you might say, well, why would that be? That doesn't sound that great. Well, by the standards of the 1970s and early 80s, we were doing twice as well as the industries across the province of Alberta. And so to some degree then, we thought we'd arrived. Hey, we were doing really well. But let's go back. As manager of mine maintenance now, I learned that for every one of those lost time injuries, we had 10 what we called medical aid injuries, where physicians actually had to suture, prescribe, and otherwise heal people with sometimes substantially significant injury. And then for every one of those types of incidents, we had up to 10 plus first aid incidents. And when you started to do the mathematics, it meant that in some divisions, that's right, in some divisions, people got hurt every year. I'm going to take you to my division and pretend that you've just successfully had a job interview and you're now joining the mine maintenance welding team. And so welcome. It's great to see that you're with us here. We really appreciate that you've chosen to join our fine company. We believe in team concept and working together. Our benefits are world-class. We'll support you in many dimensions. And by the way, there's a 100% chance you'll get injured this year. Well, that's not a really great way to start in a company, is it? And yet, that was the backdrop and that was the safety of that period. And so there was quite a resolve to improve from there. And that resolve was really strengthened when in 1984, we had our first major incident as a corporation. What you're seeing in the picture there is what we call a coker. A coker is something that actually takes a bitumen product midstream and cracks it and upgrades it into lighter ends for further processing into synthetic crude. And due to a failure in safety and risk management, we in fact had substandard material that failed while these things were in high temperature, high pressure service, leading to auto ignition and a huge fire that crippled our production. In a company that was showing year over year continuous improvement, we would forever in 1984 have a kink in our production curve. A company destined to produce billions of barrels learned its first sobering lesson in how important risk management was. Well, and I need to tell you that when it came to that lesson, we started to look at our organizations. And when we start to look at an organization, this is like a simplified org chart here, where at the top of that particular triangle, you have the CEO or the president. That's right. And then below that, you'll have an executive team, you'll have general managers and managers, you'll have supervision, and you'll have people right on the front line where the actual work is happening. And you know, the job of leadership is very much to set the values for the corporation, to provide a tone at the top that says, this is what's important. And you can imagine, after suffering that very severe incident, the new leadership that in fact we were privileged to serve under did just that. Safety now became something that was much more prominent. And in fact, the job of leadership was not only to communicate that, but to then take that through the rest of the organization right to the front line and make that real. That's right. Words are one thing, actions are others. And so if we're successful and we can get that through the organization, it will redefine how we do work. And very importantly, not only at every level, but where the risks are in the field. Safety must become an imperative. And you know, when we talk about how we do work, that's a very short definition of a word we call culture. Culture very much defines what an organization thinks is important. And we needed to get closer to a safety culture to be successful. Well, let's go back to that curve. You know, when we had those good folks join us and that kind of leadership instilled, you can see that there was some dramatic changes. Now, as engineers, we like to fit curves through things. And in this case, it really does show that, wow, when you trench in for safety and you have leadership setting that agenda and that value, it really does lead to some significant improvements. And as we were on that journey, we started to learn the value of one of the first requirements of a successful safety and risk management system, and that is that you have to apply, not an ad hoc series of activities, but apply a very systemic and comprehensive program. This has got elements according to it, and under the elements we have standards, and all of those are brought to bear on how we do work in the field, with the positive results then showing with this effort. But it doesn't stop there. You know, after those early gains, it gets a little harder. We start to see that curve is plateauing a little bit, so the gains are going to be harder won. And in order for us to win those gains, we had to take that tone in the top and we had to think harder about how it was going to influence how we led, how we managed, and how we engaged our employees. And so we very much started to articulate a desired future, a vision for the corporation and in fact the country. And based on that vision, we started to come up with some values or principles, of which safety was one, that would drive our behaviors. This wider engagement and this improved leadership application was then going to be the next phase of our journey. And so you might say, wow, that's kind of an interesting step. Supervision used to be about planning, organizing, and controlling. Now you're leading and engaging. What's the basis for that kind of a shift? Well, when you look at corporations and how they work, and you start with visions and values and those principles, those particular things, if in fact used correctly, will drive how we do all the other stuff in a corporation, from finance to production, to audits, communications, our reward structures, etc. All of that will be determined by the principle base that we set. And what that really means is that those principles or values have to be the basis for decision making. So let's suppose that we're in the business of production and we really get that kind of thing across to folks that we're here to produce and everything else takes a back seat. Well, then all those systems that you see there and all the work that we do in them is much there to see that production happens. And further, that will become our culture. That's right. Our culture will be one of moving tons or producing barrels or racking in the hours, whatever that may be. And that will define how we do work, which is, again, the way of defining culture. How do we do work here? Well, we do it to produce, and the results should show. We should start to see continuous improvement in production. And when you saw and heard about our earlier experience, but for that kink in the curve with the downgrading incident, we were kind of very production focused. getting the most of technology and bringing it to bear against this tough oil sands environment. But while you might get production, we also saw that we had major upsets, and we also saw that we've got a lot of injuries happening. And so right back at the start in our beliefs and our values, we now have to put safety through this. And in fact, safety has to be the leading value, a leading value that drives all of these others and actually parks things like production, schedule, and cost as secondary to the safety we're trying to achieve. And interestingly enough, when you do that, what you find out is that good safety and its engagement and the innovation and the attitude that it instills in the organization to take ownership also produces good production, schedule, and cost. So in fact, by setting safety as a value, you actually drive higher performance in all the other dimensions in tandem. Well, that's the journey that we were on. And you can see our visions and values as we articulate a desired future concerning Canada's natural resource utilization and energy. And we have a number of, great principles here. And if you asked me, and if I was in front of you today without prompting, I would take you through all of them. I still use many of them today. But most importantly for our chat here today, look at how we start. It says, we are safe. Yeah, we are safe, reliable, and profitable, but it starts off with, we are safe. And everything that comes after follows. And we are safe first. And, I've also got a little bit further down after realizing potential, competence, and contribution, and all those good things. You'll notice that we've also got circled here, having the courage and conviction to do what's right. And that will bring us into some of the ethics of what it is to be an engineer and a leader. But we're going to hold that for now, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. And so with this roadmap ahead, we started down the curve, and we started to get more improvement. And we started to understand that this improvement, though, was pretty hard won. Yeah, there was a nice little drop there, but we're still on a bit of a plateau, and it's going to be a hard go yet. And we started to wonder why. We started to ask ourselves, well, we're setting the values. We're trying to change culture here. We're trying to put safety first. How's that going? Well, remember our org chart. Remember the job we had as executives to communicate where we were going. And then it happened. Oh no. The message goes down. It starts to head down through the company. And then at a certain layer in the company, it doesn't go further. And in fact, people in the front line then are not getting the benefit of this direction and this tone at the top. And why is that? Well, because while we may say those kinds of things, if we then leave a meeting where we focus on safety only then to encourage or very much put an imperative for production or schedule or cost, and that then drowns out the values we were trying to espouse in safety and in fact takes precedence over them, what we start to have is we get mixed messages, and the actions of people to drive these other more traditional objectives of production or schedule or cost are going to override our convictions in safety. And let's start the plot. What happens here, if you start to look at the probability of an incident and you plot that through time, if we're not driving behaviors at the front line where the risks are, then we are kind of on what we call the risk envelope. That's right. We're starting to proceed up a curve where the probability of getting an incident is going to be realized. When you're on that curve, it's never a matter of if. It's just a matter of when. And the sad thing is, many executives and senior management might even get very frustrated when, in the event of that inevitable incident, they wonder what's gone wrong. Didn't we set those values? Didn't we communicate that safety was important? Well, we did, but did our actions carry that message right where it mattered, right where the work was done? And did the signal come across clearly? And we'd have to look in the mirror and say, I guess we haven't got it there yet. This is going to be tougher. Well, the reason that it's tougher, if I think about the mining dimension or business that I was very much integral in my early career, you know, the Industrial Revolution 250 years ago meant we could start to harness this thing called hydrocarbon and energy. We moved away from biological sources to now a resource that we would mine and use to drive our now large plants to manufacture goods. And I will tell you that the Industrial Revolution set the stage for much that we have around us today. So we're thankful that we are able to reap the benefits of that production. But boy, does it ever set a culture. Take a look at this photo here. If I asked you as a class today, well, what do you think is the primary value in this corporation? These folks have dug 108 yards in 4.5 days, and I think you can see they're pretty proud of it. You might want to ask the question, though, what was safety like? Do you think safety took precedence in this kind of an environment? Well, I would suggest not. In fact, when you look at these folks here and you look at this gentleman's arm as an example, he has more medical aid injuries on his arm than by today's standards 500 people would have working 1 year in a leading corporation. And so we've got a lot of work to do if we're going to change this kind of a mindset. You know, when it talks about changing a mindset, we have different levels of engagement. You know, if we disagree on data, well, we can start to look at, well, where's the right data? And if we disagree on procedures, we can refine those procedures and line ourselves up so that we're all doing the right thing at the same time. But boy, when you start to get to goals like production, which are ingrained in our society as evidenced by this historical photo, and the values that that implies, where in fact resource and production outpace care for human life and other considerations, those are pretty heavy-duty things that we're going to have to address if we're going to make a change that has safety become part of our culture. And it's hard. You know, we have the meeting, we talk about we're going to put safety first, we get the posters out there. Well, you know, the words are great, but the actions still might be rooted in that sense of let's get it done. And as you can see here, this is not a great scenario. Notice the wonderful ladder, not in use, but parked in the back. But, you know, it takes extra time to get that ladder. Yeah, it's going to take work here. And it's important work, because I want you to know that when we make the choices about how we do work, we set up an organization to get the results it gets. That's right, we design it to get the results they get. And if we're getting 3 to 4 injuries every month, then we can expect that the next month and through the next year, we'll continue to get those injuries unless we start to contemplate how we do things differently. And if we continue down this road, the worst can happen. These two people really don't look like they're having a good day, do they? And they're not, because there's a third person in their team who died 20 minutes before this photo was taken. A beam 1 meter by 1 meter by 13 meters rolled uncontrollably across the midsection of another young worker. And that's a tragedy. And it's unacceptable. and it's preventable. And so incidents are a signal we don't have it right yet. And when that signal happens and it persists, the worst will happen over time. That risk envelope is very unforgiving. And so it drives the fact that we need to change. If we don't want the results we're getting now, it means we're going to have to fundamentally change how we do our business. Now, change, tell me, if I could see all of you here today and asked you, who likes change? Well, in rooms of hundreds of people, there's 3 or 4 of us, maybe. I've seen a bumper sticker in Edmonton. Yeah, we love change. You go first. That's about how much we like change. And yet change is a necessary part of our path forward. And so you may recall that previously we talked about ethics. I talked about that one principle about having the courage and conviction to do what's right. And that's what ethics is about. It's about doing the right thing. Simply put, can you feel proud of your decision in the face of public or external scrutiny in every case? Doing the right thing can be very difficult, and it starts with thinking about the health and safety and welfare of the public. Doing the right thing means that we value people and care about them and their safety. And yeah, there are other pillars also. There's about competence and knowledge, knowing your limitations, your behaviors when it comes to integrity and honesty, abiding by the laws and regulations of our lands, and for the profession, taking actions that support the reputation and dignity and honor of the profession of engineering. But what I need to talk to you about here today is that first and foremost, in all those pillars of ethics, the health and safety and welfare of the public comes first. This is paramount. There is no other objective that succeeds, and all the other pillars of ethics really don't matter if you don't get this one right. It is our responsibility as we work with new technologies and build the future, and that's what engineers do, then we must do that in a way that people and society are protected. Responsibility means a duty to perform. And so as engineers, when you think about safety and you think about this talk on ethics, understand this is not about choice. This is our moral imperative as engineers to move forward. Well, here we are. We're back on that journey. We've talked now about the systems. We've talked about the value-driven leadership. And now we've talked about how to make safety real. Safety has to truly become an imperative. This, as we learned earlier with our production mindsets and the ingrained cultures of the past, is going to be hard. And, well, I'm going to take you to about 1997 now, where I become general manager of the extraction plant. That's right. This is where the oil sand comes in through conveyor systems and enters a number of vessels to be processed into a fluid called froth that can be then upgraded through the cokers. I also had the responsibility to manage a settling basin, or what we might call today as a tailings pond. Well, within this environment, there's one particularly tough area where the material comes in and gets mixed in large cylindrical vessels. These are called tumblers. These are huge. These are some 35 meters in length, and they're approximately 5 to 6 meters in diameter. They've got 900-pound steam and hot water being injected onto the oil sand as it enters. The idea being to break it down very quickly and form what we call a slurry, where the sand and bitumen is in suspension for further separation downstream. Now, remember the mining equipment? It wore. Well, if you want wear, come to the tumblers. Oil sand is extremely abrasive, and so every 3 months we would have to take these tumblers down and do major refits. We would replace large wear surfaces. It was hot, heavy, hard, humid work. And we had dozens of injuries every time we had a shutdown. And when I came to this division, I just knew that that was unacceptable. Remember, we've got to do what's right here. And I let them know it. And then a very strange thing happened. I got an ultimatum. That's right. And they say, well, Gord, you want safety, we'll give it to you. Give us twice the schedule and give us twice the budget. We'll give you safety. This is a really tough place. I want you to imagine that you're one of the board of directors of Syncrude. Wow, here you are. You've been really successful. You're a board member, and I'm coming to give you an update. Hi, I'm Gord Winkel, General Manager of Extraction, and I'm pleased to tell you that safety is under control. Now, costs are overrun by a factor of 2, and production is down by about 40 to 50%, but boy, we're safe. How's that? Well, for those of you that are tuning in here, this is a career-limiting discussion. You are not going to go far if that's your performance rendition. But what do? We told people that we're going to do what's right and that we care for them. And now we have an ultimatum that leads to, well, something that we just can't support. But you know, whose safety is at stake here? It's the very people that do the work. And why wouldn't we go to those very people? Why wouldn't we engage the very people where safety means the most? There's not much risk in this boardroom or this class right now, but on that front line, there is. Why not engage them? Let's treat people as solutions. Let's treat people not as just welders or electricians, but as people that have the talent and the capacity to take us to new levels of performance. And all we have to do is ask. And all we have to do is act on their recommendations, and we did. And I'm happy to say that after a few iterations, we learned our way through it. And yes, the first shutdowns did cost a little more and did take a little longer. But as we learned through it together, we, for the life of this equipment, achieved shutdowns where all those major refits were performed, and largely with a track record of 0. That's right, no injuries. It can be done. You can value and care about people. And if you believe in their capacity to contribute, if we engage them effectively, we can achieve safety at unprecedented levels. And that's a good story. Well, along with the safety imperative then, we see that engaging employees and having their meaningful involvement is an imperative for us to move forward on this curve. And you know, these are notebooks. Yeah, I know. Here we are doing a remote computer presentation, and we've got spreadsheets and we've got all kinds of wonderful things. We didn't have any of that. But what we did have were notebooks, and these are actual excerpts from a notebook when I was a young manager and then general manager in the field. And it recorded my field time. It recorded field time, and it talked about supporting people so they could do their jobs better. That's what this was about. And, you know, you probably don't know what these are, but these are Polaroid photographs. That's right, we didn't have digital in those days. And so we took these photographs and they actually logged a number of field contacts with people on the front lines within the divisions that we were supporting. And what was so important about these interfaces is that they became huge learning opportunities. And I want to ask you as engineers that when you start in your operations, it's my sincere hope that you will also get personal protective equipment, coveralls, and boots and go out in the field and talk to the people that you're supporting with your designs and your skills so that you get the benefit of their feedback. You get the benefit of their experience, and that experience ultimately informed our boardroom strategies. As you saw with the tumblers and the shutdowns, taking advantage of this wonderful source of input and feedback can drive strategies that are very effective. And in safety, it's just what you have to do. There's no one that knows safety better than the people that perform the work. And if you can support them with the tools and resources to take safety and risk management to the next level, that's going to go very well. And by the way, your design work, your leadership work, all of it is improved by truly understanding what's happening at the front line. Well, back to extraction. You know, as an entire division, we started to make some of the improvements that I talked about, but we were still getting a significant number of injuries through the years, and we were more demanding in our expectations for improvement. And in this particular division, I will tell you that, you know, there were 500 people working with technologies that even at that time were some 40 years old, and it was a pretty tough environment. We've learned that engaging people, having them become solutions, getting that experience reflected into boardroom strategy is all important. And in this particular extraction plant, we took that to another level by encouraging everybody, as they saw substandard conditions, near misses, or at-risk practices, to personally intervene. Now, this is hard. This is very difficult for folks to be able to come out and to then observe the work of others and or comment on the conditions around them. And we gave them the tools to report on those things. It was in the form of just a simple card. A card that would record their actions to correct these things, a card that would be used by supervision to do trending and to look at how we could improve the workplace. And when we first started, you know, we didn't have very many cards, but we encouraged. We worked with people, and there's a longer story about that. But in the end, those 500 folks turned in some 10,000 plus mitigations, corrections, and commendations that supported safe work in the field. It was engagement to an entirely new level where everybody became a leader in safety. And the result, well, history will record that this was the first division within a corporation that was already a leader in safety, the first division to work 1 million hours. That's an entire year without significant injury. And as you can see, they were recognized with a President's Award for that achievement. But most importantly, the moral imperative had been delivered on. We had been ethical. People were safe. They were kept from harm. Well, that's the story. And as you can see, you're right. When you apply those things, the performance did in fact improve. And I've tracked it to 2010 here in this particular diagram. And why is that important? Well, that's when I retired. That's right. That's when my work was done, and I joined the university now to be part of this effort here. And as you can see, our lost time injury frequencies reached levels that could never have been contemplated in the years before as possible. And when compared to similar measures across all of Alberta industry, here we were, you know, moving just under 1 million tons a day, and it was 15 times safer to work in this environment. And as you saw, we had some pretty major risks to manage. Can it be done? Yes, it can. Can we take risk management to the next level? Yes, we can. And you know, as I reflect on it, we weren't satisfied to do it just within the corporation. We also worked with entire industries, in this case, the Alberta mining industry. And while we were at about 0.5 in 87, they were at 3. But by sharing the lessons learned, we in fact experienced similar improvements. And even today, as I sit on one of their boards, we continue to enjoy continuous improvement. And the mining industry continues to operate at levels a factor of 10 better than safety performance in the balance of industry within the province. And you know, it doesn't have to take long. When I think of one particular agency that we approached in 2012 with lost time injury frequencies in the order of 6, can you imagine? Well, in the space of some 3 years, we were able to go for a year with 0 injuries. And those lessons learned then are powerful. And we have the capability then to take risk management to the next level. And that's why in this university, we're actually having courses like the one that you're in. Courses that share with you how this has been done so that you can benefit from that experience in your future careers. And you know, for that same firm, look at their performance. When you look at the start here of 2012, they were barely viable. And with good safety came good business. That's right. They're now a very successful operation. And by the way, I've checked in with them just last year, and they continue to be successful even in a tough environment. And their safety is still top class. And so, folks, that's the journey. That's our story for today. Thanks for being part of this course. And if in a small way we can contribute to your success as an engineer, then we've done our job here. And I thank you for letting us do it. Bye for now, and all the best.